Okay, well, welcome everyone. Just a reminder, the session today will be recorded, so keep everything gracious professional. As my moderator likes to say, embody your inner woody flowers. So make sure everything's above the board. And at the end of the day, thank you all for sticking around and for coming to see our presentation today. Well, today we are going to be talking about how you can innovate outreach and coordinate and handle the logistics of hosting an outreach event. And our two speakers today are myself and Stephen Leveron. Now, a little bit about myself. I have done First Tech Challenge for the last 5 years and FRC for the last 2 years. And now I'm dedicating my time to being a FIRST volunteer. All of this time that I spent in FIRST so far has really been focused on business and outreach. I've been in charge of communications departments. I've worked with sponsors. I've worked with coordinating events. All of this has just given me some experience sharing STEAM with the community.
I am Stephen Leveron. I've been doing FTC for 5 years. I'm heading into year 6 with the ultimate goal. I've done FRC for the past 2 years before deciding to start my own FTC team with some of my friends. And with both FTC and FRC, last year I was a Dean's List semifinalist, state of Georgia. I'll be competing with Ultraviolet 18304. Maybe you've seen this on social media. We're very active on Instagram and Twitter. So, of course, this being one of the only outreach classes among the entire symposium, we have to make sure that we're catering towards both beginners, amateurs, and also advanced learners. So we're just going to give a basic intro to outreach, which outreach is really any event where your team is connecting with your community. This could be hosting a STEM camp or advocating for FIRST with your local government. In general, outreach is pretty broad. So learning about different techniques to create meaningful content is pivotal in hosting a strong event. And actually in this picture here, we've got a member from FTC Team 3101, and he's actually talking about STEM in India.
So here's just another example, and this is really an example specifically pertaining to advocacy, which is whenever you advocate for STEAM education, advocate for FIRST, and try and get funding and support from your local government. So in this example, FTC Team 14481, Don't Blink in New Jersey was advocating for STEM with they invited him to one of their demos. They talked to him about advancing education in their town and ended up giving him a free t-shirt. It was a perfect example of how you can connect on a person-to-person level to really help advance STEAM in your community.
Another good example is with the FRC Team 4188 Columbus Space Program here in our home state of Georgia. Every year they host what's called a Tech It Out at their Columbus FRC event. This picture in particular is with a bunch of students and they're doing bottle rockets, something cool with STEM.
Now, one of our last examples is another kind of robot demo. So once again, we're looking at Team 3101, and what they decided to do with this event was set up a demo at a local science museum. It was a great way to connect with an already engaged audience in STEM and provide them with something that you know that they'll love. As you can see, he's showing FRC and FTC robots to kids who are attending the science museum with their families. That's already an engaged audience, and by showing them robotics, it's giving them an avenue to pursue their interests further and to get involved in FIRST.
So now that we've covered some basic examples of outreach, let's talk about what we're going to get into today. So the presentation we'll be giving covers a bunch of different outreach-related skills, such as researching your target audience, acquiring and organizing your venue, having your event sponsored or getting sponsors in general, creating a schedule for your event, communicating with your volunteers and attendees, and innovating and conveying your team's content. And off here we have Team 3101 speaking about STEM at an exposition.
So really step one in your process should be researching your demographic, getting an idea who you're targeting. If you're doing an event which is catering to parents, then it's going to be a very different event than something you're catering to students. So it's all about understanding your audience, researching the demographic. So really the word demographic just refers to the characteristics that your audience has. That's talking about age, that's talking about education, that's talking about experience. And I think experience is one of the most critical things to take away here. You need to properly gauge what experience your audience has with robotics. If you're doing I'll even use an example of doing a workshop. A lot of teams are able to do FLL workshops where they can introduce people to FLL, or they can offer classes, offer courses. That kind of event handles a very different type of experience than a robot demo. With the example of a FLL workshop, you're working with people already involved in robotics and showing them how to go even further, showing them what they can do to improve in their area, while something like a robot demo is mainly targeted at people who have not been involved with FIRST, who have not gotten to see robots and not gotten to interact with this side of their life. So really gauging experience, gauging education, gauging age are really important as a first step.
The second step of creating your perfect outreach program is coordinating the logistics. Now, this entire second step is probably the largest and probably the more difficult side of creating your outreach. Now, coordinating the logistics is, of course, one of the most overlooked steps of the entire process. Basically, the logistics make up the final plan for the final product. So things to consider and things to actually organize when you're coordinating your logistics. The event and venue and room setup. So what's it going to look like when people enter your room? Where is it actually going to be? The event schedule. What's going to happen at certain times? And who will be doing what at those times? And then the resources for providing content. What do you need to actually make sure that you can convey your content in a way that's understandable to your attendees? So you see a good example of a team that is actually coordinating their logistics and has done a good job so that they can convey their presentation. So this is Team 4188, FRC team, speaking about safety at the symposium.
So one note just on the last slide to think about too is talking about that last step. That last step is the last step of the second step has a big tie to your researching your demographics. To figure out what content you need to understand who you're putting that content out to. Now, another huge thing is obviously the venue. You need to figure out where this is going to happen. You need to figure out what medium, if it's a virtual event, which I know is definitely going to be a much bigger deal this year than it has been in the past. So figuring out your platform. So you look at what limitations it has. You look at how you need to curate your content to match that. For example, the symposium is not being held in person. We had to make a lot of changes to make it work in this kind of environment by reaching out to people in different ways, by providing different kinds of programs and events. All of that was focused on the venue. An online venue has limitations that an in-person venue might have, or an in-person venue has limitations that an online venue may not have. So talking specifically about in-person events, venues can really be anywhere. You can host STEM camps at libraries, expos at local businesses. You can host demo booths at any kind of community gathering. When you look at 5Ks and events that are really cross-community, you're able to see a perfect opportunity for your team. Things like parades even are great places to set up and to demo your robot. Now, in terms of some virtual events, a great idea is to be doing online STEM Spirit Nights. Now, not every school has been involved in this. Not every school has done this. But it's you should never be afraid to go out and ask, to go out and try and get something started. I mean, hosting a STEM Spirit Night is a great way to engage people who otherwise don't have as much access to robotics who don't have as much access to seeing programs and all the things that FIRST really gives, because they are stuck at home in classes all day instead of maybe getting to go to STEM nights that may normally be hosted. So it's a great idea to work on online STEM spirit nights. CAD and programming competitions are a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful kind of outreach, and it connects you a lot with other FIRST students. So it's a great way to really have an audience that already has experience with robotics and give them something fun and engaging to do. Also, the example right now, live streamed webinars. They're a great way to connect. It's a great kind of virtual event, and it really allows you to show off what you know and to learn yourself. I myself have learned a lot in the last 12 hours, even though I've been teaching a lot of that time.
So another little offset of getting venues is working with donated venues. So oftentimes your team might need a donated event space. If you can't host something at your own shop or in a garage, then you'll probably be asking for a donated event space. It can be something as simple as a small room at a local library. Something like a STEM camp could go there. Or say you wanted to host a full competition. Maybe you need a school gymnasium. Getting a venue donated can be a little bit awkward because, I mean, you're asking a higher power for a very generous donation. But at the same time, it's pretty simple. It's just like any other sponsorship. All you have to do is ask. So contacting the donor company with key information about your event is pivotal in this. I mean, the more information you provide, the better. And the better quality of that information, more likely they are to trust you and agree to offer up some space. So some good kind of information to send is what kind of event you're trying to host. This is, of course, one of the most important ones because, say, a marketing firm, they might want a robot demo, but they probably don't want to host a STEM camp. For instance, move that camp to a library and say, hey, we're looking for a STEM camp. This would really work because you guys are advocating for STEM. We're advocating for STEM. And we think that this would be a good idea to host here, so that way it benefits the both of us. Then you can work with the type of audience you're going to be impacting. Of course, for the example of continuing on this STEM camp, you're probably going to be working with elementary or middle school students. That's exactly the same kind of demographic that the library is trying to work with. Then if you can give them some kind of drafted schedule for your event, that would work perfectly. Say, hey, we think that we're going to want this space for an hour-and-a-half long session. The first half hour, we're going to be working on building the robots. The next half hour, we're going to program. And then the final half hour, we're all going to be racing our robots. If you can give them a sample of that kind of content, that's also really good to have. If you can show them pictures of the robots you're building, or if you send them a little video of the robot moving, that can really pull them over to your side and win them over to get you some donated space. And then in terms of just general information, normal team things like business plans, websites, etc., just relevant team information that they should already have on you anyways.
So another important note on going back a little bit, another important note on donated venues is look at the opportunities you already have. Stephen had a great example with the library, but also look at local schools. If you are a school-affiliated team, you do have sway. You do have you have an audience that is there ready for you. A lot of schools have a lot of success working with their feeder schools. I know in the past, myself and Stephen can attest to working with an elementary school to provide a venue for an FLL competition. The audience was matching. The venue was large enough to accommodate a full competition, and we were able to work with them by providing them with a lot of relevant information, including how many people we needed, the schedule, what kind of content we'd be providing. By giving them all of that information and working with them because of shared interest, we were able to get a very large space donated to us. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with getting a sponsor for your event. So it's really important to think of this just as asking a question of someone. It's not, you shouldn't think of sponsorship as some big scary thing where you're expecting rejection. What you should do is just ask a question. What you should remember is the people who you're talking to are not corporate entities. What you're talking to is another person. So it's important to provide all the information that you would want if you were in that same position and to have a human interaction. That's where the most success in sponsorship comes, is not being a robot, not just talking monotonously and sending email and email and email. It's having a human connection with someone. So it works the same way as getting a normal sponsor. You should look towards your community to see who you think would be willing. You should make sure that whenever you do find a company you're interested in getting to sponsor you, you ask the right person. Now, when it comes to a company, particularly large ones like Coca-Cola, Cox Communications, they have charitable wings. They have whole sections of their company that are dedicated to supporting local nonprofits, local educational programs, local robotics teams. It's all about making sure you're asking in the right place. A lot of companies even have event sponsorships specifically to apply for in their grants. So you can look for a grant that is meant for hosting a large event and connecting with a certain type of audience, whether that audience be students, whether it be adults. There's a lot of grants and funding already out there looking for this kind of content. And what you need to do is go out there and say, hey, I'm doing exactly what you're interested in funding. Please fund us. So it's also important to recognize the contributions that people make to you. Now, this kind of goes in general, but specifically for events, you need to give exposure. If you have an audience of 100 people and you're being sponsored by a company, it's important that you talk about that company to those 100 people because they made your event possible. So it's important to recognize all that they've given you and to give a return. Give them, some exposure for all the money that the money or venue or discount, whatever they choose to give you. Now, as I said earlier, don't be afraid to ask. The worst you can get is a no, and you have to remember that it's just another person at the other end. Another person wants to help you. So work with them. Meet sponsors where you can. Not every sponsor can give you their warehouse for an event. Not every sponsor can give you $10,000. Some may just be able to offer discounts. Some might be able to offer free pizza. Anything really helps. And it's important that you recognize sponsors for all of the things that they can do and meet them somewhere in the middle if you can't get exactly what you want.
Another good part about coordinating logistics is that it gives you an opportunity to work on your schedule. So the schedule is the baseline plan that brings your content to the venue that you've chosen. Typically, you want to have your schedule put together before you've decided and completely finalized your content. That way, you haven't really pigeonholed yourself into not having enough time for one thing or having too much time for another. You don't have to make up extra time. Your schedule should really be specific to the event rather than just, for example, if I were to host, say, an online camp, I would want that to be specific to that singular call as opposed to every single time that I do the call. So it should really be specific to the event. And another really important thing to include is the duties of the roles. So everyone should really have a copy of the schedule with them during the event, and they should be able to kind of read a little bit of information about their role, so that way they know what they're doing. So a little bit of a recap on a schedule, just some baseline information, should include relevant times and dates if you're doing a multi-day event. Should provide the names of the members you need at a particular time. That part's not completely necessary if all of the members are doing the same thing. However, for doing something like coordinating a competition where you have to actually make sure that refs are refereeing at a certain time and judges are judging at a certain time, make sure that everything runs smoothly, you should include the names so that way they know where they need to be at what time. You should also have a small little note section that should detail any additional necessities. This could be anything from just, hey, lunchtime is at this time, please be back by 15 minutes before we start back up again. Or it could even be a little section where you are providing the key for your color codes.
All right, so a great example is something like this. It's fairly simple. It's just a table that was done in Excel. It's really, it's utilizing tools that you may already have at your disposal. With something like Excel, you can put together a schedule, and right in 10 minutes, you can have an idea of things that might conflict. Now, just looking at this, all of it seems to be looking just fine. So the advantage of something like this is you're able to organize everything out, you're able to make decisions, and you're able to tell people when to go where. So something like this, just by glancing at it and checking out each row, I can see that nothing's conflicting. I can see that everyone should be in the correct area, and I can see that every station is meeting with, or every group is meeting with a different station. So it's a great way to visualize the information.
You're also, during this time, going to want to communicate with your volunteers. Communication with your event staff is essential to host a good event. So depending on your event size, you may need to contact your volunteers in different manners. For larger events, you're probably going to be outsourcing volunteers from your community. For instance, a first competition, sometimes it has parents from different teams, sometimes it has small business owners, etc. And typically you want to use an event planning website and an email list. I believe for this symposium, we used Eventbrite, and that seemed to work really nicely. First uses the volunteer portal. Both of those are really great options for large-scale events. And then, of course, the email lists, so that way you can contact people directly, and instead of having to go through the event coordinating website every single time. Then for a smaller event that's typically only going to be members, coaches, parents, pretty close people to your team, typically some sort of messaging platform such as Slack will perfectly do. I know that some teams really like using email. All of that works. As long as there's some sort of bottom line for communication and everyone has a way to contact each other, you're all set. You're going to want to make sure your volunteers have, in this sort of communication, schedule of the event, and that they can clearly understand where they are needed and when. You're going to want them to have a strong understanding of their role. Are they a presenter at a demo? Are they a booth manager at an exposition? Are they a referee at a competition? These are all things that should really be covered before the event actually happens. Now, bullet point number 3 seems kind of strange in there, a method of transportation. But I can assure you that out of my own experience, there have been plenty of times where people have to cancel simply because they don't have a way to get to the event. A lot of your volunteers are going to be people under the age of 18, and for some of them, they might be 16 or younger, which means they might not necessarily be able to drive themselves yet. So if they are dependent on someone else for that ride, you should really make sure that that they have a method of transportation, so that way you can rely on them rather than having to put in a backup. You're also going to want to have some sort of direct contact to the planner of the event or a coach or mentor in the event of an emergency. I have been through a couple outreaches where something happened, we had to get out of the building, or we had to stay in the building. For instance, there was one outreach where it was storming really hard and it would have been super unsafe to be out on the road. For that, we sheltered in the building and we contacted the coaches, said, hey, we are still here. Don't worry about us. We are just waiting for this to blow over. We'll be out soon. Things like that are super important to have just in case of emergency.
So it's also really important to look and identify the resources. So that kind of goes doubly in identify the resources you have and identify the resources you need. So for something like an online webinar, you need a platform and you need really, I know it sounds a little like a given, but you need a good microphone or camera. There have been some webinars I've attended where the microphone or the camera quality was not there and it was detracting from the content. And another thing you need for a webinar is a presentation. So that was just kind of like looking at the resources that you need, and that's really a fundamental basis for planning. If you know that you need to share content with a large amount of people, say you're doing a large event in person and you need everyone to see something, you're going to need a projector or a large screen. Some of this stuff isn't given. Some of this stuff are things that you need to look for, you need to actively seek, you need to actively get. And I can say from experience that you need to assume that there is nothing at your venue. You need to assume that you will not have access to anything. And so it's important to come prepared and to make sure you're entirely ready. Because if you're not ready, then that could go to the detriment of your event. That could be a negative for attendees, and that really makes you look a little bit unprofessional, which is not a great look to have, especially whenever you're hosting a big event and reaching out to new people to see if you can get them involved. So examples of some content resources you'll need: a projector or large screen. You need brochures, flyers, pamphlets. That's one thing that I think a lot of teams miss out on, is marketing their events. If you want attendees, it's extremely important to talk about it, to blast it on your social media, to get people excited, to get people interested. And that really guarantees a more successful event. I'll be honest, I have attended events where demonstrations were supposed to be larger and I ended up being one of the only people there. It's experiences like that that make you realize if you don't talk about something, then people maybe won't attend. It's all about assumptions. You have to assume that there will be no one and nothing there, so you need to get the word out and you need to come prepared. So more content resources. A lot of events you require your robots. For something that's an outdoor event, a tent and display board work perfectly. You need to account for things that you may not think about: wind, rain. Being prepared with some kind of tent or covering. It's a great idea if you're ever working outside. Being outside creates a whole host of things that may happen. So it's important to come prepared for that.
So now that we've covered some of the logistical type things, we're on to the third step, which is actually executing the event. So now that you've established your target audience and coordinated your event, you're all set to actually create your content and display it. So the actual executing of the event includes distributing your content, communicating with your attendees for like your final planning phase, and then making sure that you're all planned and set up in case you have some unexpected challenges.
So an extremely important thing is the composition of your content. So we separated this into the execution stage because it should be one of the last things you do. It should be after you've already planned everything out. Now that you know you're going to have this at this time and need this, that's whenever you put that together. There are a lot of times where if you get started really early on, it's great to be prepared, but sometimes you shift and you may move to a different platform. You may move to a different venue. You may completely change directions, and that's why you should plan it all out before getting started on making things. Now, it's all about what you're providing for your audience. So it's kind of like a school project is a good thing to compare it to. It's with a robot demo, it's show and tell. With providing instructions or class, it's somewhat like writing an essay, writing a class presentation. And really, all of your content depends on your event. So content can also really be a lot of different things. It's important to think of it broadly and not just assume what you may normally associate with the word content. So some examples of content are conference calls with teams you're mentoring. That's an example of content that you are providing. You are providing your team. You are providing your advice. That is the provision of content. Now, another thing could be the matches of a competition you're hosting. It could be the instructions for a STEM camp. It could be an elevator pitch at an exposition, or it could even be a robot performance at a demonstration. All of that counts as content. And composing your content is an important step in executing your event because it's really the final step you're taking as you're getting everything out there.
So once you have your content, your next goal is to actually communicate with your attendees. So your attendees are, of course, going to be the people attending the event. To get the best turnout, you're going to want to notify them a few weeks before the event, and then probably once, twice, maybe 3 times within the upcoming days. Note that depending on the venue, you may not need to do this. Some companies will actually contact the attendees for you. So if you were to be doing something at, say, an exposition with a large company where you are just kind of showing off what your team does and your impact on the community, and people come into the event to see what you can do, and then they leave. Something like that, typically the sponsoring company will actually put out the word for you. Doesn't hurt for you to actually go on social media, say, hey, we're doing this. If you're interested, stop on by. But of course, you won't be needing to manage email lists for individual people that'll be joining you. Good things to include are going to be an event itinerary, which is going to be a schedule with brief descriptions of your content, kind of like your schedule, except you don't need to be nearly as specific. Then any sort of necessary forms that they need to submit. This could be a survey for your demographic, which can be useful later, or it could be consent and release forms for students. Maybe you are going to a school. Sometimes to take pictures, people need to sign consent and release forms. Dates, times, and addresses. Include directions if you're at a large or confusing site. Say you are hosting a competition on a university campus. There are multiple buildings and people can get lost. So including some sort of map or specific building number, really good. And then the contact information for the event organizer. Just like with the last time, being able to have this direct contact is really beneficial for just about everyone. Something bad happens if someone can't make it, or if they otherwise have questions about your event, they can do that without having to fight with a no reply email that an event planning website might give.
So something that Stephen touched on in the last slide and is really important to think about is managing unexpected challenges. So it's something we've kind of mentioned throughout the whole presentation. You need to bring a tent in case it rains or the wind knocks you down. You need to manage transportation in case someone can't get to your event. It's all about some things that you may consider assumptions, but really could be the opposite. It could become an unexpected challenge. So it's important, no matter what kind of event it is, whether it's a small event, whether it's a big event, that you need to stay prepared for any kind of inconvenience. So planning a lot in advance, making sure that everyone knows about the event for weeks ahead, that all goes into preventing unexpected challenges from occurring. But even still, using Stephen's example, getting stuck in the middle of a heavy, dangerous, severe thunderstorm, that's something that you can't control, but you need to still handle that unexpected challenge. So preparation was what saved him and a couple of other volunteers there. It was because they had the contact information for the event organizers. They were some of the event organizers, and they were able to let people know where they were, to get some clarification on what they needed to do, and to stay safe. So it really comes down to strong communication. It's a great way to handle unexpected challenges and to make sure you're ready for anything that you may encounter. So some of the common stresses that happen, as I can attest to myself, is losing presentations, losing people at on an event, having people not show up when they need to. So, or even needing an emergency exit or not having the proper forms. All of that can be really relieved by planning in advance. So saving your presentations online so that it's not just reliant on a computer being there or a thumb drive making it to your event. Having backup roles. So making sure that there are some volunteers who know how to do different things. If your mechanical guy doesn't show up, have at least some knowledge of how to drive the robot for a demo to happen. Having emergency exit procedures. This comes a lot with your venue. So if it's somewhere like a classroom or a school or even just a standard building, there are emergency exit procedures already laid out and readily available for you to see. But it's important that you know them and that you can communicate them. So if a fire starts during your robot demo, you should know where to direct people. It's part of being, a host of an event. It's part of making sure that everyone involved is safe. Now, another thing that can be pretty simple is forms. Really just forms in general. You want to make sure that you're abiding by all the rules, especially whenever you're working with school children and working with with counties, with school districts. It's important that you follow all of the rules, not just to keep you on their good side, but to make sure that everyone's safe. So sometimes you need photo release forms for people to be photographed. Now that may sound like a minor detail, but it's something that can get you in big trouble. Something that can really hurt your event. Something that can hurt your relationship with your venue, with whoever you're working with. So it's important to follow all of the rules and make sure you have everything ready. Make sure everyone who's there is allowed to be there.
All right. Well, I know that was a lot of words, but we got through it, and we're about to open up the Q&A, or I guess it already is open, and you can ask questions, but we'll begin answering them now. If you have any other questions that come up after the event, you can always contact us. Our emails are in the PowerPoint. We've got elijah.peacock@wheelermagnet.com to contact Eli, or you can contact me at preferably ultravioletftc@gmail.com. Just general communication about outreach. One of the things that I've been working on with a couple other teams is the unofficial Discord server for First Tech Challenge students in Georgia. I know this is more of an FTC-based thing, but if you scan the QR code, it'll bring you into the community. Another thing to clarify is that it's a student-led initiative, so it's not affiliated with Georgia First. So please don't get those two lines mixed. But otherwise, yeah, we're ready to do Q&A. So if you've got any questions, I see there's one question already.
I see there's one we can take. I think we both can add some input on this, but Sierra from 16796, Red Robo Dragons, asked about hosting a STEM night. So her specific question was, our team has looked into hosting STEM night style events for middle schools / elementary schools, but how can we overcome the technical barrier in that it might be harder for younger students to navigate these online web conferencing softwares? Now, I'll jump in and get started on this, but I think Stephen can speak even more to this than I can. Using a platform and keeping everyone on one platform, I think, is a great way to kind of alleviate some of the pressure. Now, with an event like this, asking people to jump from room to room, asking students to sit and switch around, to go to a million different places, it might not work. That I think is where a lot of the pressure and navigating a platform comes in, is bouncing around. Now, if you keep someone in a central area and you keep all of the content really just targeted directly at them, maybe you have to switch around with volunteers. If you're doing like a STEM camp, you may have volunteers switch present different content. But keeping everyone in one place, like using one Zoom call, for example, is a great way to keep everyone, as limit the confusion of web conferencing software.
Yeah, I will say that I'd agree with that. So, I mean, of course, one of the biggest things is keeping everyone on the same platform. I was running a STEM camp that worked with 3rd through 5th graders, and this was over the summer, so it was before anyone that goes to school learned how to use platforms like this. So the big thing we did was at first, it was a 3-day STEM camp, just to give a little bit of context, but the first night we did was over Zoom, and we had both the parents and the students join on, not only to make sure everything worked, but just as kind of an introduction to everyone, break the ice some, get everyone a little bit comfortable with Zoom. From there, we were able to work for 4 hours over the next 2 days, and the students almost always worked completely on their own, or I guess within the little bubble of the Zoom group. One of the big things that you might want to look into is some of the moderating behind the scenes. So like we've got Chen moderating for us right now, and he is the reason that everyone comes in muted. Something as simple like as that can really make a big difference. I know like sometimes younger kids, they struggle to mute themselves. They can be loud, they can be close to the microphone, etc. So being able to kind of, I guess, control the level of quality that they're experiencing helps with the overall quality of the event itself.
Good answer. So are there any more questions? It could be kind of a case-by-case basis like this, or it could just be a general outreach question.
We can give them another like 5 minutes, and if not, we can end the event there.
Well, I think honestly 1 more minute will do. Go ahead and let everyone out early if we don't have any questions coming in soon.
Works.
So you're on the clock. All right. Oh, we have one coming in. Stephen, I'll let you take this one.
All right. So we teach virtual robotics to kids, but we mostly run into issues with technology. How do we handle it? I assume, and you can clarify this by asking a second question, I assume that you're talking about issues with the platform itself, like having to help them operate that.
I'd guess so too, and I think that what Stephen talked about earlier is a great example of how to handle this. The first night of his example, the STEM camp that he ran over the summer, they had the parents involved. Now, it's the same as in a robot demo. You wouldn't just have a student alone. It would be usually a student and their parent bringing them to a STEM night, their parents being there with them as they're watching a robot demo. So similar to that, it's having the parent get things started, having the parent show them the right place, and then from there maybe the student will be able to kind of control it on. It's all communicating how to do things. So you need to make sure that you have very clear instructions if you're using a platform people aren't familiar with. Really simple enough so that anyone could understand it, including a student.
Yeah, and I would say that I don't know how frequently you do these virtual robotics lessons, or if you have done them recently. I will say that the one I ran most recently was so much smoother now that almost everyone's school has been run through Zoom in some form or fashion. The nice thing with little kids is that even though they might be little, they do learn really quickly. So just the hands-on experience with their school time has really improved the way that they're able to handle the applications with our robotics lessons. One of the things I would advise is to try to stick to Zoom if you could, because that is where a majority of students go to school. But I mean, then again, something like Microsoft Teams, WebEx, those all work as well.
That's true. All right, I see another question. Sierra again from 16796 asking about whether it looks better for FTC or FRC to have a series of small events that reach smaller or different audiences, or one large event that would take a lot longer to plan that reaches a very large audience. So I'd say it's really important to look at it and see what you think is making the most impact. I know I myself am often concerned with the optics of an event, talking about, oh, are judges going to like this better, or are they going to like this better? But I'll say from experience, it's really about what your team is interested in doing. If your team is interested in hosting robot demos to smaller audiences, that is an exceptional way of getting people involved getting them involved in STEAM. Now, I will say that large events have a really interesting dynamic to them. It's a very interesting experience to plan a very large event, and it's also something that involves a lot of cooperation. So in large events in the past that myself and Stephen have helped run, it's involved a lot of communication. It's helps you communicate and work well with other groups that maybe you haven't worked well with in the past, or haven't worked with at all in the past. Like, for example, you can work with your school's volunteering organizations to get volunteers for a large event, because especially if it's a several hundred-person event, you can't manage that with just the 20 students on your team. You may need more resources. And whenever you're planning something large, it's about reaching out for those resources. So I don't think that it's impossible to host a large event. I hope that you've kind of gathered that from this, is that it's not the hardest thing in the world, and it's something that's a really interesting and rewarding experience. So I would strongly recommend that if you have a series of smaller outreaches that you continue on doing, keep it up. Keep up with the robot demos. Keep up STEM camps. It's a great way of reaching people. But I think it is a really special thing to work and host. Try and do a large event a year.
All right, and we've got Sarah McCune, who asks, how would you suggest marketing an event for a team that is not allowed to have social media? That's a tough one. So I would look towards getting sponsored venues or sponsored events. One of the main reasons this is because oftentimes the sponsors will actually advertise for you. In my experience, I worked very closely with the Cobb Public Library system, and they, anytime we scheduled an event, they would put it on their website. They would put it they would put it on all of their social medias. They'd have little flyers about it in the actual library itself. So it was pretty impossible to try and go to the library and not know anything, like leave completely clueless about what we were going to be doing. This works for plenty of larger events as well. Like, for example, there's a 5K called the Dog Days 5K that the East Cobb Rotary puts on. They have a huge reach. Something like that you don't necessarily need to advertise heavily for, because people are already going to be there. They're going to be going through all the booths anyways, so they will get to yours. So I would see, at the very least, if you could get some form of social media, if that truly is impossible, looking towards I guess more traditional advertisement, so newspapers, flyers. If you can get like little flyers to put on bulletin boards somewhere, that's perfect. I would honestly look up traditional marketing strategies and try and see if you can make any of those work with what you're trying to get.
Great answer. So I see another question is asking which software did you use? I'm guessing it's talking about the example, and I think, as Stephen mentioned before, Zoom is a really effective software to use for really any virtual event. People are familiar with it, especially because a lot of educational programs have been shifting to it. So they see that every day in school. They're used to it. Kids, adults, everyone has been forced to grasp with some kind of web conferencing software. So Zoom is the most common. Zoom, I think, is a great platform to start with. So I see another question is, how have you gotten involved in FLL teams in the past in terms of mentoring or helping host competitions? So not having a direct school that leads into ours to use as a way in. So in terms of mentoring FLL teams, it is great to have a connection, but you don't necessarily have to have that. So a great way to get connected is to just reach out and see if someone needs help. One great way to meet and communicate with FLL teams is to volunteer FLL events, to own FLL events. So if you can work with FIRST to get the permission to host an FLL event in your area, or even just hosting an unofficial FLL workshop, is a great way to get in contact with FLL teams to see who may need some help. I think the FLL workshop is really a great first step where you can put together a curriculum, put together some content that you want to share with some members of your team that have experience in FLL, and sending it out there to FLL teams in your area and seeing, who bites, who wants to attend this event, and getting in contact and continuing to work with them and help teach them after the event is a great way to start a mentoring relationship. So that kind of thing, right now, an in-person workshop is impossible. Not necessarily impossible, but pretty inadvisable due to some current restrictions. But you can do the same thing online. Providing a workshop online is a great way to get in contact with FLL teams and to start working with them to start mentoring.
Yeah, and I will say that probably the first couple teams that I had been involved with, my mother's FLL team and my aunt's FLL team. And that's where I started. And after going to more FLL-based events, that's how I was able to branch out and help mentor other teams. So, I mean, really, if you go to events where they already are and start asking if they'd like advice, if they need help. Of course, unsolicited advice can sometimes upset people, hurt their pride a little bit, but in general, people are going to be willing to accept it, especially if you know what you're talking about. So, I mean, it just like with sponsors, it's really a matter of just finding the right person, making the connection, and then asking them if you can strike up a partnership and if you can help them.
Just a quick heads up, there's 5 minutes left on this event.
Sounds good. Thank you for the heads up, Jen. I do see another question in the chat. Are there any resources for teams that are not 501c3? Great question. So you don't necessarily have to be a 501c3 to host an event. It can be helpful with certain sponsors. It can be helpful with working with schools or libraries, for example, but it's never a necessity. It's something that can help you, but you don't need it. You can still reach out to a library and ask if they want a STEM camp. And I'll tell you 9 times out of 10, whenever you're asking someone with shared interest, a shared audience, and who could benefit from having a robotics seminar, a robotics class, or a STEM camp, someone who would benefit from that as well, 9 times out of 10 will not say no. They'll be interested in working with you in some way, shape, or form, even if it's not the exact event you wanted.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been a part of a community team that's not a nonprofit for the past 2 years, and we have not had any issue with it. And then in terms of just like getting events sponsored and things like that, FIRST does have a way for you to get sponsored. It's called fiscal sponsorship. They do it through the FIRST Regrant program. Basically, you apply for a grant and you provide FIRST's information. So then the sponsor gets the benefit of FIRST being a 501c3, so they send the grant to FIRST, and then FIRST redistributes the money to you. So that's really the only time when you would want to be a 501c3, go through the effort of making that simply for outreach is just getting events sponsored. I really wouldn't worry about it too much. And then Sierra asks, are there going to be FLL events through this year with COVID? So who can really say is the question there. I believe that they are going to attempt to phase back into to a traditional event climate, but at the same time, right now, your best bet for getting involved with FLL teams is going to the FIRST team and event search. It's on the FIRST website. If you press the search button, it's the first thing that shows up. If you go there, you can look for FLL teams in your area. You can search by zip code, city, state, etc. And typically they do have contact information there. So just saying, hey, I'm with this team, I am nearby, and we're interested in kind of helping you out. That's
So
typically the best way to do it, I would think, considering the fact that there aren't many events to go to.
I totally agree with Stephen. And just to touch on it just a little bit more, there was an excellent session provided last session block on First Lego League Explorer and how season will be and some changes. So I'd say keep an eye on the Georgia First YouTube page to see whenever this is posted, and maybe you'll get a chance to check out what they said about how FLO will operate. But I would agree with Stephen. It's going to be complicated, and I think he was right in saying that a virtual connection is going to be the easiest, especially during these times of being separated.
Yeah, I think that what this pandemic has taught me most about robotics and outreach in general is that when there's a huge drought of outreach, you can't really do outreach to do outreach anymore. I mean, I know that the point of FIRST is not to do outreach to win an award, but if that was one of your main motivations, it can't really be anymore, because there's not a really good way to just accumulate a gross, like a higher gross total of outreach. So it's just the smaller things. So if you're trying to mentor a team out of interest rather than winning an award, I would say definitely go to the team and event search, because that's the way that you can be the most helpful to them. And I think that's a really good way to strike up a personal connection, if I'm being quite honest. So,
well,
I believe we're out of time.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for attending. I believe we're ready to wrap up day one. So congratulations on, or rather, thank you for making it through, and congratulations on the end of the day. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Remember, if you want to contact us, our contact information is on the screen. But hopefully we may catch you tomorrow as well in a different session.
Yeah.